My guest today is a trained counsellor and psychotherapist. He's a coach and senior facilitator of the Hoffman Process. He's also the creator of Love Code, a workshop that helps couples reconnect with each other and with themselves by diving deeply into finding ways to relate authentically and honestly. His training and experience allows him to educate and guide couples to decode the complex world of love and intimate relationships, providing couples with the necessary tools and awareness to navigate the relationship terrain, opening up their flow of love again. When not working with others, my guest finds joy out of being with his wife and son, playing tennis, and creating landscapes in his garden. In this episode, we talk about relationships, obviously, how to rebuild intimacy that has been fizzled out, and the signs to look out for that your relationship may be in a rut. Enjoy the episode. Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining another episode of the Skin I'm In podcast. I'm your host, Chanel, and this is a place where women can tune in to gain peace through clarity, purpose through inspiration, and the permission to be themselves through the stories of other women. If you're enjoying these episodes so far, click the like, share, and subscribe button so that more women like you can be positively impacted by the stories in this podcast. Welcome to the Skin I'm In podcast, Craig. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Chanel. Nice to be here.
You have so many interesting areas of study that I'm looking forward to unpacking today. So you are trained in counseling and psychotherapy. You are a coach. You are a senior facilitator of the Hoffman Process, which I'm really interested in finding out more about. And you run a workshop called Love Code with your colleague, Annie Luby. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
So you've dedicated many, many years working in this area of relationships. Why is this important work for you to do in your lifetime?
All of it, you mean, or the relationship work particularly?
The relationship work specifically.
Yes. I think for me, relationships were an area that actually really challenged me when I was young. I was very good at being all together when I was on my own. But what I would find once I was with someone is that it started to bring up feelings and reactions that I normally wouldn't encounter in myself. So, for example, I might suddenly feel more needy or insecure or vulnerable or angry. And the way I'd been brought up is you sort of don't show a lot of those things. And then I suddenly would go weird, as girlfriends would say at the time, withdraw, go cold, suddenly start in my head going, this is really the wrong person for me. Obviously, they're just, and often sabotage relationships because I just didn't know how to navigate or even recognize what was really going on inside me, particularly around being with someone else. Yeah.
That actually sounds like just a normal part of relationships. And so you're telling me that these are not necessarily normal, but perhaps they're, if I'm understanding correctly, behaviors that we develop because the relationship is bringing up something in us that is either making us uncomfortable or retreat, something like that?
Yeah, one thing we use in Love Code is a central model of 3 circles. And the inner circle is what we call the healthy self or the spirit self or the authentic self, something like that. I believe we all have one of those. It's that lovely part of us that feels love, connection, wholeness, openness, vulnerability, peace. But then around that, often because of the way we've been brought up, the experiences we've had, our history and other relationships, and also a history in this current relationship, we have a layer that we call the wounded or vulnerable layer. And in there can be lots of fears of abandonment, fears of being controlled, fear of rejection. There's also feelings of inadequacy, insecurity, hypersensitivity often. We very much in this layer can really take things very personally. So it's an area that most of us aren't really comfortable being with. We don't really want to go there ourselves. And we definitely don't want the other person to get to that part of us. So it's a funny contrast then, because in relationship, we want to get close, but also we have these parts of us that don't want to be seen, don't want to be exposed. So it can create quite a push-pull type of dynamic often in a relationship, of coming towards and moving away. So what we often do then around that wounded layer is we create a layer of protection. And this can be behaviors like judgment, denial, avoidance, withdrawing, blaming, attacking, passive aggressive behaviors, stonewalling, addiction, numbing out, image, superiority, self-righteous, etc. There's so many of them. And so often when we feel that vulnerable or wounded part of us get triggered, it's just, we're only there for it's like driving through a one shot town. We're there for a moment and we're like, let's get out of here. So we then quite reactively fly into this protection mode. And so suddenly we're becoming cold and withdrawn. And then often what happens is the other person feels like, wow, Craig or Chanel's gone cold and withdrawn here. That triggers their vulnerable place. This doesn't feel so safe here. Or I feel hypersensitive, they're judging me or something like that. And then they jump into their protection. And then suddenly you've got two people in their respective protections. And it's kind of like our interaction starts to feel like we're getting nowhere. It's like two plates banging up against each other. And it's quite a painful and frustrating place when we're in there, because we have this feeling of not feeling heard, of often just being in a survival mode. And so what we say is that when we operate from protection, we tend to trigger the protection of the other person.
Yeah, it's interesting that you'd say that, because I always think from, my own experiences, and that's all I can really do, right? And I used to be someone who would fly off the handle and not let anyone get away with that, right? And so in the moment, I had to talk about it right now when I was angry.
Yes.
And so after I did all the work that I've done, I think I've mentioned to you that, I'm a senior graduate of the Landmark Forum. I'm an ICF certified coach. I've done a lot of work in the self-development space, spirituality space. These are things that I live for. And so where I've come to the other side of the spectrum, which is interesting that you said, is that when I do get angry, I go quiet and I isolate so that I don't fly off the handle. And so now I'm wondering, have I gone too far on the other end of the spectrum? Because my husband knows when I go quiet, he becomes, interestingly, extremely attentive.
Yes.
And but also knows to leave me to calm down. And then I can come out of my little isolation cave and I can talk. Because when I don't take that time, I'm working on managing my state, I guess, so that I'm not flying off the handle. So is that a healthy coping mechanism that I've moved towards, or is it?
I think it's a healthier. It's definitely a healthy.
Healthier. Yes.
See, if you, the people have different styles. So probably your initial style was more, when I'm under threat, I'm going to, attack as my form of defense. No one's going to mess with me, sort of thing. The trouble is when we go that intensely at someone else, it will trigger their fear, and then they'll probably meet you with protection. And the thing is, then we lose that connection of a way. How can we connect and go through this tough place? The trouble with that protection mode is we don't really work together with it. The others almost feels like the enemy. And then, so I think going more into that softening, that withdrawal is probably healthier. The thing we would say then is it's really good to be able to communicate. I got a bit triggered then, that I noticed that I've gone into some withdrawal. It's okay to be in protection, but when we name it like that, it's actually a beautiful thing, because naming your protection starts to really bring you out of protection. Now we don't then want the other person to go, well, finally, after 2 years, you've admitted, because
Yeah, yeah, I could get
sometimes there's
that.
this point scoring thing that goes on, So they would say, hey, thank you. I appreciate your honesty about that. And suddenly the regulation of the state starts to lower. You get calmer together. You're more adult together. And then you can start to actually express what's going on in a moderate way. And that's part of healthy relating is, can I express my reality moderately?
Is it something that you have to announce every time? So this change occurred for me before I met my husband, thank God. And so that's the version of me he knows. He does not know the version that other people knew. So is it something that I would anticipate initially you'd have to announce, but do you then spend your life announcing, I'm triggered right now, so I'm going to go isolate and calm down?
Well, hopefully you get less triggered as things go on. There's a nice saying from trauma work, if you name it, you tame it. That often when we just name it, it starts to take some of the charge out of it. Otherwise, it often goes up to our head. We start sort of creating story. We go into assumptions or projections about the other. They wouldn't accept this part of me, or they're ignoring me. But often if we can just say, hey, I'm feeling a bit vulnerable right now, it just lowers the charge in the nervous system. So when we name it, we tame it to some degree. I don't think you necessarily have to unpack it a whole lot more unless it's really strong. Would you be
Yeah.
up for that?
Oh, you know what? For me, I think that this might be an area of, I guess, a lot of reflection that I do. We've only been married 2 years now, but it has been the most confronting for my self-development. And I have grown so much thanks to my husband, because he is like a mirror to me of the stuff that's still going on that I haven't dealt with. And so I am very like, let's peel the onion. However, not everyone likes or wants to peel the onion. And so I'm left with, well, I'm doing all this onion peeling in my life and the people around me are not. And so I am up for that. And others, let's say my husband, I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, doesn't know how, doesn't know where to start. So that for me is hard,
we
but
have a
also because I have
workshop
the
in 2
training.
weeks if you want. Yeah.
Oh, we're coming.
I'll send it along to him. Yeah.
Yeah. But because I think that, especially for me, that is one of the things that I have struggled with since I started doing my self-development work in other relationships and this one. And so what do you have to say to people who are in a relationship where they are so committed to their self-development and maybe the other person isn't, or, how do you manage that dynamic?
Look, it is hard, and people have different capacities for intimacy. And, typically men, because of the way we're conditioned, may have a lower capacity. Not always, it can really vary. But I was working with a couple of days ago. She loves to unpack everything and explore it and share it. And he just gets really overwhelmed by that. And actually, when she's so articulate and saying it all, for him, he actually feels quite overwhelmed by that. So what I would then work for him with is actually sharing that his limit is a much lower threshold for intimacy and sharing than hers. But you can express that limit in a loving way, because often what we'll do is we'll not speak it, and then we energetically start withdrawing from the other, or making a little sarcastic comment, or picking our phone up. We find ways to unconsciously distance when we need to just say, hey, I'm hitting the end of my bandwidth here. Can I have a little bit of time out? I know you could talk about it for another hour. And we also have to respect that in each other, the limits, as long as there's a caring conversation around it. It's not just, I don't want to talk about it, because that leaves the other one high and dry. It's like, I've hit my limit. Let's talk about it again later.
Yeah. And it sounds, and look, language is so important. There's a way you can say something in like 7 different ways and it lands in different
Yeah.
ways for everybody. And it depends on who you're actually speaking to as well, right? And so I think that language piece is really important. And I guess that's why I asked, do we have to announce, or do I have to announce every single time I'm triggered? I would anticipate someone just learns.
Yeah, if you can manage it yourself, maybe not. But there will be times I often say, can I let it go first? If I can let it go, that's wonderful. If I realize I'm unable to let it go, it's going up into my head, I'm starting to have, thoughts about it and creating story, then I know it's probably something I need to just speak about.
That's a really good way to filter, because there's a lot that doesn't just, it's like that saying, pick your battles. Some battles you can just let them slide.
Yeah.
Just let them go.
Yeah.
Let them go. Yeah, I really like that. And so in the work that you do, how does the Hoffman process, like what part does that play? And what is the Hoffman process?
The Hoffman process is a 6.5 day residential, very intensive workshop retreat, and something I did over 30 years ago and have been teaching for around 30 years. It's looking at the patterns of behavior we took on through our childhoods. And often what happens is, for example, if you had a parent who was very absent and unloving, a young child doesn't have the capacity to go, well, that's just my dad's inability to be able to express intimacy or love. The child will, especially when that's repeated, they will start to interpret that as a belief, I must be unlovable or I must be unworthy. And also then if you have a parent who's, very critical, mum's always criticizing you, and the child will start to probably after a while become self-critical. And they take on the patterns of the parent, either as beliefs or behaviors. And then later on, when they have a relationship or children, they'll often be critical to their partners. And you never liked it as a child, but you find that we compulsively reenact these behaviors and these beliefs that we learned as a child. For example, one for me was fear of confrontation. Because in our family, we didn't really ever get angry or confrontational with each other. So that felt incredibly scary for me. Really, it was, and it's much better now, but there's always a slight, okay, I've got to bring up this thing here with this person. So, so in Hoffman, we would actually start to see that I learned this behavior, and you trace it to where I learned it. And then we see that if I learned it, I can also unlearn it. And it's quite an emotional journey. So you actually let what we call the emotional child within you, who could never say, actually, that was your lack of love, Dad, or your criticism, Mum. It's actually, we let them speak up quite strongly. You write letters, you express anger, and you give back the negative conditioning and claim back your healthy, whole self within you. You might say, well, that sounds like a lot of anger at the parents. The anger is a necessary step, because the child has felt like a victim. Victims can't forgive. When we're in the place of the victim, Gandhi actually said, forgiveness is the weak cannot forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. First, you have to feel strong. And when we feel strong, we have that capacity to forgive. And the second part of the Hoffman is actually moving into compassion, understanding for our parents, seeing them as children too. And then we start to equalize that relationship. It's like, I'm a human being, you're a human being. We're not caught in that, you never loved me type blame type of thing. But it's a beautiful process, very deep and transformational.
I feel like you know my parents, or you've been speaking to my parents. You just described my mum and dad. And I never was able to really accept them until I, had the first weekend of the Landmark Forum. And suddenly, and it's interesting what you just said, they became human to me, Craig.
Yes.
I had my mum on a pedestal. She could do no wrong. And then I spent a year in a whirlwind of, oh my God, my mum's not as perfect as I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I see them as human, I have compassion for them, and I accept my dad for the way that he is and my mum for the way that she is. And, and I'm like, now it's time for me to unlearn the behaviors that I put into place to protect myself from not feeling like I'm enough and being super criticized. Her mum's critical. So I'm like, now I can see that your mother was critical. You don't know any better.
Yes.
And so that's been a massive shift in my life. However, there's still emotion there. So how do you remove it? Are you meant to remove it, or is it just that you make peace with that emotion?
Can you tell me what sort of emotions they are? Because I'm just not clear on what you mean by the emotion.
I go through anger. I go through resentment. I go through guilt.
Yes.
They're probably the strongest ones, and sometimes it depends on what I'm thinking about. So if I think of, let's say, one of the things that I realized, so I'm not sure that I mentioned this to you when we spoke offline, but I miscarried last year in October, and that process of becoming a mum brought up a lot of my mother wound. And I really struggled to talk to my mum for about a month because I realized, or at least what came up for me, was that I didn't feel safe in my body. Therefore, I felt afraid of becoming pregnant. Like that, I have a thing with pregnant bellies. It weirds me out. But for me, I never felt safe in my body as a child because I didn't feel protected by my mum. So there have been occasions where things happened that my mum just completely disregarded it, never acknowledged it. And I was like, you're meant to be my mum. You're meant to be protecting me. And that wasn't there. So I came up with a lot of abandonment, I guess, issues when I felt pregnant, and then I miscarried.
Yes. Yeah, it's probably that's where in Hoffman, for example, you would express for a couple of hours anger. You also would have tears. You would, in some way, grieve for the childhood you didn't have. Grief is an important part but when we get into more our power, we're less in what we call the victim position. When we feel victim, it's kind of like, this isn't fair, this shouldn't have happened to me. It's much more like how a child is. And then the child will often go then into resentment or blame. Either you shouldn't have done that to me, or life shouldn't have done that to me. But we can't do an emotional bypass. We do have to let ourselves feel those feelings, I believe, rather than we can't just change it by looking in the mirror and saying, I am positive, I am confident. And it just, we do need to, getting back to the love code model, move through the wounded layer to get to our essence again. So, and same in Hoffman, when we embrace the feelings, we feel them, then we start to be able to anchor in really a place of self-acceptance. The ultimate, for me, I used to study a type of essence psychology. And once our teacher said to us, who's here to feel good? And we all put our hands up. And he said, that's wonderful. That's beginner's stage, But he said, the next stage in the work that we're doing here now is you need to be able to feel whatever you feel and meet that with acceptance, just as you would accept feeling good if you're feeling insecure or inadequate. Meet that with the same compassion, the same curiosity. And what he said, we need to develop non-preferential awareness, that rather than going, this is a good experience and that's a bad experience, it's just like, wherever I am, can I accept that? Can I inhabit it? Can I be with it? And then there's nowhere to fall. It's like, if I can just be with that, I never wanted to show when I was younger that I was vulnerable to my mates, and then I started doing therapy, and they sort of would slightly make little smart ass comments to me about it. And I would feel kind of a bit inadequate around it. As I got more comfortable with my vulnerability, then they would say, "How are you?" And I'd say, "I'm feeling quite sad. My relationship just broke up." And because I was comfortable in it, then they felt a little bit awkward but it also created the permission for them to be more open with it. So the acceptance of where we are to me is so central. It's just such a lovely quality. If I can just accept me where I am, if I can accept this feeling, say in a relationship of feeling a little bit hurt or rejected, it softens the whole charge. We can sort of self-soothe and meet our own needs as well in that place.
So are you saying that we don't actually need to confront the person? We can do this work on our own?
It depends. Again, it's a bit like, can I do it on my own? Can I resolve it? Or no. I like this sometimes. I know because I'll go to bed and then I'll start having an argument in my head with the person and saying, what I needed to say was this and that. And then I know, no, I can't do this internally. I need to speak. I'm a little bit scared of speaking. I'm not quite sure where it will go. And one of the things when we do bring up these type of hard conversations is it's important to bring them up gently and just say, I just want to share what's in Craig world or Chanel world. You know, that's what we're kind of with the relationship work is like, rather than saying you did this to me, it's like saying, this is what's happened for me when this happened.
And I suppose that's a really healthy way to approach a conversation. I would say that it disarms the person.
Yeah, as a byproduct. Yeah.
And so talk to me about Love Code. So
Mm-hmm.
you facilitate these workshops. They can either be residential or not.
Yes.
How did this work come about? Why did you think that this was necessary?
I knew a therapist, a wonderful relationship therapist. Her name was Vasamati, and we'd known each other for many years. And then she moved to Australia. She worked more in Europe and America. And she said, I would love to do this work. This is around 2000. I'd love to do this work here, and I'd love to do it with you. I was already a therapist, but not as trained in relationship therapy. So she's really mentored me and taught me. She's a wonderful human being and therapist. And yeah, and I had just a longing and a calling to do this work. It just spoke to me. Its simplicity, was just such a missing piece for people. I mean, we get much more education on how to drive a car than to have a relationship. You know, we do road rules, we practice the parking, have driving tests and instruction. But with a relationship, it's often just go and do it. And if it was anything like my family, the role models were really poor, you know. I mean, if I looked at the way my parents related until they divorced, it was terrible. So it's kind of like I'm fumbling in the dark, yet particularly when we're younger, I'm trying to act like I know what's going on in sexuality as well. And, you know, it's wonderful when you can actually be with someone and just be able to share wherever you are and have that sort of safety together. So, yeah, that really spoke to me, that work. And it was then she met someone who lived overseas, went away, so I continued to take it on. And then recently Annie has joined me in working because it's actually much better to have a man and a woman doing the work. So, yeah.
You are so spot on when you say that we get way more education in things like driving. No one tells you how hard it actually is to be married. Like it's so different from being in the relationship. And I remember saying to my husband before we were married, before we moved in together, once we move in together, things will be different, because there were times where, and I'm sure, you know, many people can relate to this, when you live separate lives, you spend an intense 3 days together and then you come home and do all your washing, your cooking, your groceries, all the things, you know, all the catch-up stuff, and then you spend another intense 3 days together. So once you move in together, that changes. because you're in each other's face every day. You have to do the washing, the cooking, the cleaning, the groceries, and all the things that you would normally do in private in your own home while that person's there. And so that really, for me, you know, I remember saying this to my husband because he had never lived with a woman before we moved in together. I'm like, things are going to change. Things are going to change. He's like, what do you mean? But I was not prepared for what changed when we got married. I thought it would just continue being the same. So what are some of the things that if someone's listening to this right now, they're not married yet, maybe they're engaged, maybe they're in a long-term relationship, maybe they're not in a relationship at all, but what are some of the things that can help prepare them for what comes when you do get married?
Can I ask you just briefly what changes you noticed when you got married, as apart from that first sort of more dating period, and just so I can answer it more to what you're saying?
Yes, of course. So for me, I'm despite what people may think, I'm actually quite introverted and I love alone time. And so for me, the days where I got to come home, or, you know, I wasn't spending with my then partner, now husband, I got to do all the things that I, you know, dedicate relaxation, meditation, gratitude practices, clean my house, which I find very therapeutic. And so when we moved in together, and it's not like I had previously lived with someone before, so it wasn't new to me. But what was new was the amount my workload changed. So yes, I do the washing and I do the cleaning, but that meant that that all doubled for me. And so I became extremely tired and cranky because of that tiredness, especially at the beginning. And then, you know, we got a dog and then we got married quite quickly after getting engaged. And so it was just a lot on my plate really quickly. And I felt just really tired. I was always just really tired and became quite snappy. So that's what changed for me.
Yeah, wonderful. That's great sharing. What probably I would say there is there's two sort of, well, there's more than two needs, but there's two very primary needs. There's the needs for connection with a partner. And in the early stages, we're often maxing out on the connection. It's like we go over our own boundaries. You want to make love again at 11:30, even though I've got to get up at 6. Sure, darling, you know, that's fine. You know, because we want to close the deal. We're sort of riding on the energy, but it's not sustainable. And at a certain point after that sort of intoxication period, and we might move in together, just as you're saying, my God, I actually just would like some me time, you know, or I just want some space, just space to read a book or reflect or meditate, and that can be a clunky period because it's often quite hard to articulate or even recognize what we need. So I'm a bit more like you. I like quite a bit of my own space. I like connection, but then I really enjoy my space. And yet, because my mother, I was the eldest, my parents were separating, she looked to me for a lot of emotional needs. She sort of perhaps overshared with me. And so I became this person who felt responsible for the other's feelings, particularly my partner. So what that brought up for me was a difficulty in being able to say no in a connected way. I felt guilty about saying no, or I didn't feel like I didn't even recognize that need for my own space. And then you start to get agitated. You know, you get a bit agitated, you get a bit antsy, start little snipey comments. And often what it is underneath is just an unexpressed need. So sometimes I get it used to get it so strong that I feel like there's not enough oxygen in the room and I've just got to get out. And I used to laugh because I would say to my partner, I'm just going to pop out and grab, you know, this is in the days of newspapers, you know, grab a newspaper thinking, I'll get the newspaper, I'll go and sit in the coffee shop, I'll have like an hour and a half to myself, read the paper. And she'd like, oh, I'll come with you. And I'd like, oh, no, I've got to like do some bills and banking.
Yeah.
Because I was using strategies to try and get it rather than just say, I need a bit of my own time right now. How is that for you? So that's one of the examples. The other thing is unconsciously often when we get in a relationship, we want the other to give us all the love we missed out on growing up. And so we can come in often with a lot of expectation and subtle or not so subtle demands. If you love me, you should ... And so we can get a little bit entitled, reactive if things don't go our way. So it's also starting to recognize, if I get 50% of my needs met by my partner, I'm probably doing quite well. They don't have to be on tap for me all the time if they're my partner. But you need enough needs to be met, but not every need will be met. And once we can get that perspective, I think it becomes a lot more calm. Like the work we often do in the Love Code workshops is we get people to come back into a more mindful, embodied state. And so I'm just doing it right now. I'm coming back and in, and I'm sharing from back and in rather than being out and up. And so once we get back and in, and we do practices where the other person drops back and in, it's like there's more of a meditative quality to our relating. And then I can say, what's happening for me right now? We do an exercise called tracking. Is I'm noticing a tightness in my chest. And I have this feeling of needing a bit of space right now. And you can see as I'm saying that, I'm talking about needing space, but I'm actually very connected to myself and to the other person. And this creates a lot of relaxation in our nervous system, so we can start relating from this more adult state. It's something we also then take into sexuality. Can I actually be more, particularly couples been together a while, you can't always just trade on excitement. And so it's getting more present, more embodied, more subtle, but in that back and in type of slower connecting with each other, be it emotionally, sexually. It's a wonderful quality to really develop, and people often don't know anything about that.
And that's the other thing that you just brought up, that I can hear the stories of all my girlfriends for the past 10 years who have confided in me just how much intimacy changes.
Yes.
And, even in I did an interview with someone who is in the family constellations area of work, which I know that you have some experience in, so I'm interested to find out what led you to that as well. But he had said, if there is desire, or if there is connection, that physical chemistry, then the relationship can be worked on. But if there is no physical chemistry, then the relationship really doesn't have much of a basis or much of a foundation. Would you say that is the case?
I think generally it's good to have that. It's like a raw energy. Sometimes there are couples that are more sort of best friends, like best friends chemistry. But I think it's more, I do believe that raw material is really helpful. Sometimes that can be over traded on by couples. It's like they'll use sex or that energy to try and wallpaper over everything else. So it's good to have it, but definitely you do need the other work often because sometimes couples will come to me and they say, look, the only thing that works is sex. Whereas other couples will more say, sex is like the canary in the mine. We started the resentments often build up. That's one of the things that happens. And then once we have that resentment and it's not expressed or it's not cleared, then you think, should I have, make a bid for connection, physical connection with my partner, or should I check my emails? I think I'll check my emails. Because the first layer we're going to encounter is this unexpressed or unresolved resentment. And so we start losing the sex, and then people can say it's just the love's gone or the attraction's gone. But often, really, when you look at it, it's just covered over by these hurts or resentments or unresolved conflicts that might be there or hurts that might be there.
So if there is someone listening who they originally had that raw connection stuff and then they no longer have it, whether it's in a long-term relationship or marriage, are you saying that it is possible to get, I mean, I understand that intoxication first year you probably can't get back, but are you saying that you could get some of that back when it's completely gone?
Yeah, if you're both committed to the work and maybe finding a new way, because sometimes people are still looking for that rip your clothes off in the hallway type of chemistry. And if they don't have that, they think nothing's there. So we've taught sometimes, Vasu and I used to teach sometimes retreats for couples, kind of like Tantra, but in a non kind of woo-woo way. It was like really grounded psychological principles of Tantra, which was meeting through slowing down and connection. And, it's something just like conscious touch. Like the first time you go on a date with your partner and you held hands, it was alive. And I'll often do that in my workshops. I'll just say, like, just hold each other's hand or touch each other's hand as if it was the first time. And people start to do that again and they realize they're so present in that touch, so conscious in that touch, that suddenly it's there again in something so simple as just our hands touching. Yet often in our daily lives, we've got a phone in the other hand. We think the other person's hand's sweaty. Like we're just not present and invested. So it's bringing back that quality of presence, of really being there. And it can be all there again. Not in so much a high octane, exciting way, but in a beautiful and very energized way together.
So how can people get that back? Like, or even maybe not even get that back. Some couples don't realize that they're in a rut.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the things that you've noticed in the work that you do where there are signs of your relationship starting to get into a rut?
Yeah. Probably it's like, I call it sometimes the railway track existence, where it's like I use an image at the start of the workshop of a railway track going into the distance. And I'll say this is often what a long-term relationship is like. You have proximity, but not connection. There's no intersecting points where, we have it in our house at home sometimes. I'm on the TV watching rugby. Sulin's watching a mini series on hers. My son's on the computer, and we're all kind of on our own railway track, and yeah, and it's just sometimes we just need, and it's sort of comfortable. I think we're becoming more and more an avoidant society. I remember being, just wasn't working in Singapore and got on the underground train there, and every person in the carriage was looking at their phone, maybe 50 people, and there's just no connection. And we also, I think, bring that type of quality to our relationships as well. There's so many distractions and, phones in the bed and things like that. So it's about, I think, reinvesting in connection. And sometimes even, if there's been a lack of that, I do a sort of a 7-minute sharing exercise where each partner you get home from your day, and sometimes it's like, oh my God, we've got to do intimacy now. And it's like, we're not even intimate with ourselves. So in this exercise, you just sit and you just say, what's happening in me right now is I'm feeling really speedy. And I notice there's a lot of energy in my head. Then I take a deep breath and I notice I just get a bit more present even saying that. And then I actually feel a little sad that we haven't connected lately. And, and then you take another deep breath and you gradually just get more connected with you, which creates a connection with the other. So you need you being connected to really have that connection with the other. So then the other person shares, and the other one doesn't say anything. So you don't butt in or anything, and then you thank them, and then you swap over. But yeah, you just have to watch for that railway track type of existence, and then bringing some intention and making bids for connection again.
And they don't necessarily have to be sex. It's just any
No,
kind of connection. It can be hugging, holding hands, cuddling
totally.
on the couch. Because I think a lot of people assume it's, we're going to have sex today. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's a
yeah,
lot more than just that.
definitely. I think most of it won't be sex because, as relationships get older, the percentage of the time we're having sex is quite small. So a lot of what else happens is actually really important. How can we be connected? How can we also be spacious with each other, respectful? I sometimes use a little tool of when you're leaving, going for work or something with your partner, you might give them a peck on the cheek. I say, actually, make that a 7-second kiss where you just actually feel your lips against their lips, be present in it. And just that 7 seconds changes your morning. Because, when we're really in an experience, we're really present in it, it's much richer. Otherwise, it's kind of the grandma kiss,
Yeah. And it just brought up for me, I remember when my partner and I moved in together, when he would go to work, I would physically, he's a tradie, so he gets up very early in the morning, he leaves early, but I would physically get out of bed, kneel into bed, and I would hug him and kiss him goodbye. Now I'm like, we've got the 2 dogs in the bed. I'm like, yep, okay, bye, babe, have a good day.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
so it's even in those moments, I'm like, he must have just relished in me making an effort to get out of bed and embrace him. And now I'm like, I am too tired for this.
Yeah.
So like, that's one of the things that I really want to bring back, because even I miss that. It makes a difference to my day. I'm a hugger. I love a good hug. So yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes a lot of people are busy these days, and it sounds like you are as well. But then I think what I'll say is work on quality if you don't have quantity. Like, a quality half hour is probably better than 24 hours of low quality.
That is so empowering. It makes me feel relaxed when you say that, because it almost does feel like, and I know for myself, I'm like, oh, I feel guilty because I'm not her anymore. I'm not fun Chanel anymore.
No.
But that just lifted a load off me to think it doesn't have to be about how often, how long. It's that it's an actual beautiful quality interaction in whatever it is that that you do. So that's a bit of pressure. That's a bit of a load off.
Well, it's also, I think what I hear you saying there is you also need limits on that. And there can be sort of expectations we put on themselves or project that the other will have on us, that I have to be this sort of goddess for my partner. And really, I'm not feeling like that a lot of the time. And, so,
Definitely not.
And that's normal. That's life, So, but I can give you this much. That's where I'm comfortable. And that's this lovely thing of like valuing what we can have and bringing ourselves to it. And it's quite relaxing if you're a little bit avoidant like me to know. And it's finite. My fear is if we start, it could go on forever. And, I don't really live in that now, but, if you're more avoidant, it can really feel like that, I'm going to lose my autonomy or myself if I go too deeply into this.
Yeah. And so much of us do give, and I can only speak from a woman's perspective. and the women that I know and the women that I've seen growing up, where we give up so much of ourselves in order to keep our family happy,
Yes.
that often my needs are so far in the back until I had a meltdown. I think it was maybe about a year and a half ago. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I need help around the house. And unlike a lot of the women in my life over the last 20 years, when I think of that, they don't speak up about what they need. And so they completely shut down and they become really resentful and they suppress all of those emotions. And I'm like, no, I'm going to feel the emotions. I'm going to tell you what I'm feeling, and you're going to help me around the house.
Excellent. No, that's so every day, and it's so important. So many people come now with domestic, the dividing of domestic duties, and it's because it's not like the old model of the man went to work and the mother stayed at home. It's changed. We're both working people generally, or have children to look after, and so that division of labor in the house is important. And it's wonderful that you speak up about it, because that's where you keep that channel open between you and your partner. The people you talked about who didn't do that then starts living as resentment. My needs aren't being met. Do I then feel really generous about coming and giving you a hug? I don't. I'm still in that resentment. So we start blocking that our flow of love to the other. And then we start looking at other ways to distract ourselves or redirect that energy. And it's also really important to be real in a relationship. Some people go into this thing that I call managing your partner. I'll give them a little bit of quality time and I'll just be nice, but they're not really saying what's really true for them. They might be saying, actually, I'm feeling upset about that, or I really don't have the capacity for that. And so when you just go into this managing way of being with someone, you start to feel walled off because you're not really bringing you there. And then you feel a lack of intensity. And then we can start looking for intensity outside the relationship. That's where sometimes people go to affairs or workaholism or addictions, because I say and I'll often particularly say this to men, but really to anyone, don't be the good partner, be the real partner.
Oh, and how is that received? Do they understand what you mean by that?
They do, and particularly their partners really do, because they can feel something I'm not getting. But then that might be them saying, hey, I don't have the bandwidth for this right now, or I felt hurt by that. But then the room gets real. And intimacy isn't just like in the movies, like, bike rides in the park and picnics and simultaneous backlit orgasms and things. It's intimacy is into me see. Just, this is where I am now. This is what's happening. This is what I feel. And so you could be sharing that you're feeling, withdrawn, and it's intimate because you're sharing it. And it's an exploration. And then you go, and why am I withdrawn? What's underneath that? I felt hurt when you didn't reciprocate that yesterday. And then, we're going a bit deeper. And so we miss intimacy if we're just looking for the movie version. It's like, just what's real and true for me now.
Would you say that most of the people who come to see you, or at least initiate, are the women in the relationship? Or do you find that some men are like, you know what, we need to go do this love code workshop?
Yeah. Traditionally it was more women, but now there's a lot more men coming. I mean, I have more men come to me one-on-one than women now, because I think men sometimes maybe feel more comfortable speaking to another man as well. But I think there is a growing need for men to, I think women are better at supporting each other traditionally. They're just been conditioned to be able to talk about stuff with each other. I think for men, there's a lot more mistrust. It's a bit more superficial. It's like sport or politics or joking, but harder to actually create that sense of brotherhood. And so I think men are kind of starting to realize this and this disconnection, and starting to really initiate much more now. So it's really encouraging.
I can't help but think that, when you talk about the brotherhood, because we talk about the sisterhood a lot, hashtag sisterhood, like it's such a thing, but you never really hear about the brotherhood unless it's some kind of woo-woo bun man group where they're all sitting and, dressed a certain way. I have a vision in my head and I know better than that.
Talking stick. Yeah.
Talking stick. But you really, my dad said to me when I was 15, and I didn't understand it then, you are who you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And I did not understand that at the time. I had a best friend that was just not a good human being. But now when I look at everybody in my life and I'm like, well, are these the people that I want to be sitting at my dinner table? And I look at like my husband and I'm like, are these really the people you want to be sitting at the dinner table of your life and you sharing your, most profound moments with? And it doesn't ever really, any time I've had a conversation like that with a man or a male, it doesn't resonate in the way that I guess it resonates for me. And so when you talk about the brotherhood, I think to myself, I mean, they're so conditioned to keeping it surface, giving each other shit.
Yes.
If someone does try to do self-development work, they will tease that person. And it's such a part of our culture to, things like porn and sex addictions and stuff like that, that has so often been said, it's just what guys do, that I think that there's a breeding ground that it's really hard to literally take yourself out of, because the rest of society is saying, well, no, this is normal for a bloke.
Yes.
And so how do you manage that with, whether it's the male clients that are coming to see you or the couples that are coming to see you? Because there would be that level of conditioning that you kind of have to unravel.
Definitely. Yeah. I think, the session with me or the workshop it's a little bit like the nursery. It's like where I come and practice being more open and being more intimate, getting more comfortable with sharing things, getting more comfortable with sharing that with my partner and seeing the world doesn't end or no one's humiliating me or laughing at me. And out of that nursery, you can start taking that into your world. The thing is, we often, there's sort of a shaming thing that can happen with men. It's like those put downs, it's like it creates a discomfort. And so men can make sort of shaming type remarks that sort of put you, and then you're like, whoop, back into protection, But, it's wonderful when you see these workshops and seeing the men connect. I mean, that's often for me the more emotional thing, because I get quite teary sometimes when I'll see a man like who was the age of my father, and then he breaks down or opens up, and it's like it seems to impact me more than a woman, because my mother was a very emotionally expressive type of woman. I'm more used to seeing that, so it's really sort of touching and rewarding to see men. I know with my father, he was very non-demonstrative, didn't show affection, didn't say I love you, and then after the Hoffman process, I went to see him, and part of what we do is we also tell them that we love them. And my dad, I told him that, and then we hugged, and I just sort of hugged him, and then he hugged back, and then after that, my dad became a hugger. He had never hugged because his father was incredibly Victorian, New Zealand, a stoic kind of man, and it felt so uncomfortable with it. But once someone had just initiated that with him, then when I saw my dad, we always had a hug. It was a bit burp the baby on the back, but it was like, it was just so nice to see him liberated from that constraint of being able to, touch and hug, particularly another man.
That makes me emotional. Like, I would love to be a fly on the wall just to see that, because much like, your grandfather, my dad's the same. He's very cold. He's a burp the baby hugger. Like, you can never get in close and like bear hug my dad. That is not happening. And so I now get that that's his limit.
Yes. Yeah.
But I used to make it mean like, oh, he doesn't love me. And so it's to be able to experience that with other men in the room and be the cause of that, like that would be so profound. And I anticipate it doesn't ever become something that you're used to, because every experience would be so different.
Yes. Yeah, and often what we find in the workshops is once the men open up, they love it. Because it's like, wow, this feels great and it's safe, uh, and so there's men can be very forthcoming and really share. So it's something that's really satisfying about the work for me as well. Just seeing that.
And how does the family constellations training come into all of this? You're clearly interested in some level of the ancestral trauma stuff that comes through. How did it come about for you to do that kind of work?
I did training in it, and which I loved, but to be fair, it's not something I really do a lot. I'm a bit more of a like here now person. I mean, I will sometimes bring that in, but we did a wonderful 6-month training, a whole bunch of therapists with a woman, Corrine, in Avalon, where I live, and she also combined shamanic work with it. She was a shaman as well, but so we all loved it. But yeah, I do think this is what the Hoffman process is. There is Bob Hoffman, who developed it, called it the negative love syndrome, and that each generation hands down that same conditioning, that same patterns of behavior, and this is this is a way to actually break that handing down of the trauma or the wounding or the patterning. And I feel like, for example, I've broken that with my family's lineage. Particularly my father's there. So, um, and then you feel more free. Then you start to feel like you're not someone's got your puppet strings, but you're actually just more free to be you in your life. And I think that's one of the most rewarding and satisfying things for people, is if you can just be who you are, the freedom to be who you are.
One of the things that I'm really learning through this podcast, Craig, is that there is no one way to healing, and no one practitioner, no one modality. And so to be able to tie in all of the things, I'd never heard of the Hoffman process before being introduced to you. And so I think that it's just so interesting that it ties in so many different areas as well, but it also depends on the practitioner, right? And so you come with so many other trainings that it really feeds into everything that you do. And it's just a more holistic approach to that healing. To me, that's what it sounds like,
Yes.
that you bring to all of your workshops and your therapy sessions with people.
I think as a therapist, you have to some degree, have gone to those places yourself. I kind of believe the client will only go as far as they feel you can go. So I did a lot of work on myself initially. I did lots of different workshops and sessions and primal therapy and all sorts of things, and screaming on a floor. And so I got to be not afraid of feelings. I just got to get comfortable with them. And I think people can feel that. They can feel that you can meet me there, you can take me there, you're not afraid of where I can go. And, I know that there's a lovely process we sometimes do used to do in Love Code with men and women, where the man would actually hold the woman from behind as partner, and we'd put some quite strong music on. And then he would just say, I'm here, I'm not going away, and I can handle you. And it was this quite powerful exercise of just affirming, particularly for the woman, and then we could swap it over. Someone can stay with me even when I go in more raw spaces within myself.
Knowing all that you know now, with all the work that you've done, what is something that you wish you knew sooner?
Good question. Probably, I think it's a good question. There's so many different parts I could answer that with, but I think I probably wasted a lot of time, particularly in my younger life, keeping an image up. And just preserving an image. And I remember when I first started therapy, my sister told my father that I was doing therapy, and I was quite a high achieving kid at school. I was the head boy of my school, and good athlete, pretty good student, popular. And and my father said to my sister, "Why is Craig doing therapy? He's so well adjusted." And I said to my sister, "Actually, that's why I'm doing it. I've become so good at adjusting myself to what other people expect me to be or need me to be, but actually I didn't really feel authentic." And then even in my family, if I tried to change that, usually I'd be the happy one at the dinner table. If I came to the dinner table and was a bit quiet and a bit sort of, maybe vulnerable, they'd all go, "What's wrong with you? Were you okay? Are you?" So no one also wanted me to be different. And so I had this shame that if I showed people this untogether or messy part of me, that it would be really shameful, that they would judge me or not love me. And I remember in my first workshop that I did, and people had to go up the front and sort of be processed by the person. And I was just so terrified, of this sense of exposure, that if I really went blah and was just me without kind of impression managing it, something really horrible would come out of it. So yeah, I think being authentic, keeping that image took away some level of feeling that I could be authentic with people, and that's probably the big difference I feel now.
And what would you say is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
I feel I'd like to, and do feel I actually have touched people. I've helped them be more themselves, to embrace their truth, to live their truth, to be the potential that they were really meant to be. And that doesn't mean they have to be high achievers, but that it's just that sense of having helped people be themselves and be true.
And if you think about the man that you are today, what would you say is the thing that you are most proud of, or that you most love about who you've become as the man that you are today?
I feel it's probably a lot about the work I do. It's that, and that I actually have really learned to love, to be open. I love bringing up my son. We had a big row last night, but I know he can take it. And then later on, he was saying, you were just so wrong what you were saying." But we have this honest kind of true relationships with each other, with my wife, Sue Len, who you know. But it's the sense of just having lived the full catastrophe, having, I've done so many different experiences. I didn't do a traditional route. I spent a year of my life in India and, doing yoga and seeing teachers. And at the time there didn't seem to be a master plan for it at all. But having just followed that, it all kind of starts to contribute to who I am today and what I bring. So it's probably that I trusted myself and was true to myself.
I mean, I find you to be such a soothing person. And as you said, I know your wife, she is also super soothing. I could listen to her for hours. She's just got the most beautiful voice, and and you have a very calming energy. Your son is so lucky that has
Yes.
two incredible people, who work on themselves and who are making a difference in the world. I love the work that Suline's doing, and I'm having her back on the show to talk about her wildcrafting book soon. And just to be able to talk to you about, love code and the difference that you're making in relationships. These are really important things that none of us are taught about when we're growing up. And we just, like you said, have to find our way. I call it the sewerage tunnel. Like you're just walking through shit. There's rats everywhere. You're falling over there, but you see light at the end of the tunnel, and you're just constantly working towards that. And it's just, this conversation has been really valuable for me And I share a lot about my own experiences because I think that, it's important to be authentic. It's important
Mm.
to be real.
Mm.
And for the listeners to know that I totally understand some of the things that they're going through. And there are things that they're going through that I have no idea what it
Mm.
feels like to experience. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I have learned some things. I
Mm.
will be making some changes. Back to hugging my husband in the morning. Definitely.
Yeah,
So
and I've really appreciated your sharing and your openness. It just makes it feel, rather than just an interview, it's much more a conversation or just a meeting of two people. So I appreciate that a lot about you as well.
thank you, Craig. Please share with the listeners where they can find you and how they can work with you.
Yes, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can go to lovecodeworkshops.com.au and also just search craigtunnell.com.au. I'd love, if you need help with anything, love to see you. And thank you, Chanel, for that.
If you are interested in connecting with Craig, I will include in the episode description and across socials links and ways you can do that. So if you haven't already, head on over to Spotify, Instagram, and YouTube, and now Rumble. We're now on Rumble. So follow the Skin I'm In podcast to be the first to know when new episodes drop. Craig, thank you so much for being a guest on the Skin I'm In podcast. This episode brought up a lot of questions for me around the relationships I have with my parents and how they are still impacting the way I give love, the way I accept love, and the coping mechanisms I have put in place to protect myself when I no longer feel safe in a space that once felt like home. I know I'm not alone when I say for many years, decades even, let's be honest, I had no idea what I was doing when it came to dating and relationships. I never had an example of a healthier relationship to look up to, and I don't know anyone really that does. I'd probably be able to count on one hand people who I know say that they have a healthy relationship that they can look up to. And it's gotten me into relationships that weren't healthy and didn't serve me because I didn't know any better. And I dated those who chose me because I thought being chosen meant that I'm special. I didn't realize that I also had a choice, that I could actually choose who I was with. I know it sounds strange, but have a think about it because you might also be in the shoes that I was in. And I can't tell you how important I now realize it is to know that regardless of whether you've been chosen or not, you are special. And if someone doesn't choose you, they were never meant to choose you. They were never meant for you. And the person who is will eventually show up. But there is a catch, guys. You've got to show up for yourself first. That's right, you heard me. You have to show up for yourself first. That doesn't mean you have to be fully healed first. I think that one of the other things that I've learned about relationships is that the healing happens when you're in the relationship because it takes the relationship for you to practice what you think you've healed. And so it's really important that you do your healing work within a relationship and not try to do the healing work only before you get into a relationship, because there's that whole thing of when you say, oh, I'm going to do my healing work and then I'll find someone. There's always that and then. I'm telling you guys now, your greatest work is in the relationship itself, but that doesn't mean that you can't show up for yourself first. And when you show up for yourself, that means that someone will also show up for you. I love that Craig talks about reinvesting in connection, that we often make a decision to look at our emails rather than reach for intimacy with our partner. And I really appreciate that intimacy is so much more than just sex. I think in our culture, we've come to accept that doing the deed is more important or the most important thing. But I've always thought there has to be connection first. There has to be a tingle in the fingers when you touch first. I mean, come on, guys. Anyone who's in a long-term relationship knows that that first 6 months is electric. It's electric. That chemistry has to be there for more than the arousal period. And perhaps that's the key we're missing. And that's maybe why divorce rates are so high. We've forgotten how to connect with each other. I mean, that and, making sure that you marry the right person for the right reasons and not all the wrong reasons, or, ditching that belief system. I think this is really important, actually, ditching the belief system that there are plenty of fish in the sea. Yes, there are plenty of fish, but you don't want to eat them all. Some are poisonous, and you know what? Others just look downright nasty. Let's be honest. And okay, There are also some that are just too big to catch, and the ones that are too small are just not satisfying. So, as someone who knows nothing about fishing or fish, let's be honest, I'm really proud of that analogy because I feel like it paints a really good picture. Yes, there are plenty of fish, but it doesn't mean that we should be eating every type of fish. I really also got from this conversation the toll it takes to neglect the needs of your partner. If you think from the context of love languages, the way we give and receive love is different. And until we recognize what our partner needs, we can't give ourselves authentically to the relationship. We can't actually give ourselves authentically to any relationship. Every experience in our life depends on the interaction we have with others. And the only way to have it resonate with who you truly are is for you to embrace your truth, to be your truth, to live your truth, and reach the potential you were always meant to have reached, so that when you do meet someone and start something, you have the capacity and resources to choose someone who can meet you at your level and set solid foundations for a loving relationship that will stand the test of time. Guys, I know I say this all the time and it's super important, so I'm going to say it again. Do the work. Be there for yourself, stand for yourself, get to know who you truly are, because that is when you're going to find someone who is going to be aligned in your values and be able to share a future with you that is fulfilling. With gratitude and grace, have a wonderful day.